Wow, so many great speakers today, so many great slides. Just really happy to be here. All right, okay, this green button. Everyone's talking about this green button. There's 2 green buttons. Okay. Well, I'd like us to talk about how we talk about research. And by that, I mean how we frame research to participants and to communities, the story that we are asking them to enter into. So in ADRD research, we have a long, long story of inequity, mistrust, and underrepresentation, and we have the story of health disparity, disproportionately higher risk for ADRD, high rates of diabetes in our communities, and on and on. But as minoritized people, we have another story too. Actually, we have many more. It's also a long story. One of building community in the face of exclusion, of each generation believing in something better despite what we see. And it's a story of individuals making change against all odds, and it's a story of banding together, sometimes literally arm in arm, to demand our human rights. And it's this story that I'm asking you to enter into with me in this talk. It is from this asset-based, this empowering lens that I want us to see the story of community and how we can bring this framing into how we talk about the story of research. This is us. This is our Oregon Outreach, Recruitment, and Engagement Core. We're all here except one of us. So first, I'm going to revisit 2 models that align with how we engage with community, and then I'll provide examples from our center for how we frame and engage community in the story of research. But I can tell you right now, the first step, and you've heard this again and again today, and it's a story worth retelling, the first step to engaging participants and communities in the story of research is for us as researchers, recruiters, and outreach specialists to engage in the story of community. We must enter as active listeners and observers what they have been through, what they want, their values, their strengths, their concerns, where they put their energies and organizational power. We do this by spending time in and with the community. So the Engage model, this was developed at Rush. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but it's definitely worth revisiting. So this guides a lot of how we do our engagement. It focuses on being in the community, giving first, before ever advocating for research. It starts with networking, which is really just a quick way for us to exchange our stories, what we do and what we stand for. Then it's giving, partnering in community events, and being of service. Think of it like service before sign-up. For example, like at health fairs. Only then is it advocating for research. Then reporting back to communities, and finally evaluating, always asking the community, how are we doing? In our recent paper about intersectional frameworks of research, justice, and participation, this was a paper that was led by Dr. Andrea Gilmore-Bykowski, we talk about the Engage model. About giving first, how this act of being in and with the community engenders trust with diverse communities prior to any discussion of research participation. Oops, back. There will be a few slides I have to skip just for time today. So the asset-based community development model, where's Gina? Right there. This also starts with entering the story of community, getting to know their assets, their strengths, their values, and then going beyond active listening to organizing around issues important to the community. Gina Green-Harris and colleagues provide an excellent example of this approach. It looks like 90% giving first. Then having community advise them how, not just then talking about research, but having the community advise them how they should talk about research and engage the community before community members are ever asked to join in research. So there's more on these 2 models in these 2 papers here, and one of these papers, of course, is from our meeting last time here in 2018. So like these models, the Oregon Outreach, Recruitment, and Engagement Core centers the community's story first, understanding ways we can serve that is meaningful and actually helpful to the community. So as our outreach specialist, our community outreach specialist, Charles Fennell puts it, you didn't know I was quoting you when we had that meeting the other day, but As he put it the other day when we were discussing this, it's just being in the community where there is a need to be in the community, and this doesn't always align with Alzheimer's or dementia, but it aligns with community health. Oftentimes, the primary health concern, it's not Alzheimer's, it's not hypertension or diabetes, it's other diseases that are prevalent in the community, but we can piggyback off of these, right? We can link these to brain health, and in ways that help people see that brain health is health. It's not separate from the rest of our bodies. So a sense of belonging in research, it starts well before one is enrolled in a trial. I think we all know that. Rather, it is cultivated through recognition that the institution sees the community's assets, hears what they have to say, and serves the community in ways that align with what they have said they want and need. Through service and the community outreach specialist time, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, familiarity with the institution grows, as does perceived benefit from engaging with programming and events. And through this engagement, the idea of entering into the story of research becomes more personalized and more possible. So the community outreach specialist, I need us to talk about this for a minute. I think it's different from the recruitment specialist. So the community outreach specialist, this is a position that is all too often non-existent or desperately underfunded. The outreach specialist's main product to show for their work is time, literally the hours spent in the community and the number of contacts they've made. While to me, the recruitment for the recruiter, their primary product is number of people enrolled into a study. Because of the time the outreach specialist spends in the community, they become key to guiding research teams on the content and the tone and the messaging of their recruitment materials. But we often try to combine the two roles of community outreach specialist and recruiter into one person, expecting the recruiter to do the extensive networking, have the expansive time, because that's what it takes, to be an available presence in and with the community while also recruiting into research. So our outreach specialist, Charles Fennell, which joined us just a little over a year ago, let me tell you a little bit about how much time he spends in the community. So far in 2023, 12 people within our center have attended a total of 68 events. 38 of those were attended by Charles and largely alone. So that makes up 55% of him alone being able to spend time and be in the community, because his primary job is time in the community. It's actually not recruiting. And of those 68 events that totaled a little over 2,500 contacts, he made 45% of those. And he also made 53% of the underrepresented minority contacts. So that is one person, when given the time, when that is their primary responsibility, who is making over half of the center's community contacts. And the nature of his relationships are far less transactional than with the recruiter. And that's just by nature of having more time dedicated to being in and with the community. But it's on a community timeline of trust building rather than on a study timeline to enroll. If we really want to increase representation, our institutions must offer adequate and attractive salaries to fund this critical and skilled position. Time and money, there is no cheap shortcut for curating lasting change that may result in better research representation. There's just no shortcut. We need time and we need the money to support that time. So once we've done the work, which is ongoing, then we can talk about participation. And how we present research participation matters. We can present it study by study with a list of activities and eligibility requirements, which is absolutely necessary because people need to know what they're getting into. But we can also be sure that we have crafted a singular message across all studies, across our center. We must emphasize that all staff are outreach staff and prepare everyone to be able to talk about representation in a wide lens and historically conscious way that captures the broader picture of why it matters. Representation matters for the development of effective and relevant treatments and programming, for better life quality, for longer lifespan, for scientific integrity. We all need to be able to connect the dots between the history of inequity, exclusion, and brain health disparities. And we must echo this in our teams. My colleague, Dr. Alison Lindauer, she's PI of the Telestella, which is a telemedicine study. And week after week in her team meetings, she is repeating the messaging that representation is imperative. Representation is imperative. But we know that as brain health researchers, that's our central focus. But that can be abstract for community members, especially if it's not their immediate concern, right? And it might not be the motivating factor for driving them to join into or to stay in research. So in our work as an ORCOR, we've found that framing brain health as a story of social justice, which I think many of us do here, and of community rather than individual benefit often carries more meaning. So talking about agency, again, I'm sure this is repeated knowledge, but it's worth repeating. Talking about agency is more motivating than narrowly focusing on deficits, disparity, and increased risk. So using a social justice lens with community, we've talked about how white people get the privilege of knowing a drug or a treatment is backed by data from people who look like them, while Black people can only hope that it will work for us. And representation, it shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right. Also, when we're with community, we use a community benefit lens, and we've talked about how when Black people participate in research, our communities are counted so that when change comes, we will benefit too. So this is the kind of language, the kind of story that we're asking them to enter into. And using an agency and self-empowerment lens, we talk about how we can't know about ADRD in Black Americans without Black Americans, that we are the change that we're looking for. So this is an example of a slide from Community Talk. And we frame community members' participation in research as being historically significant. We talk about history change makers to set the context that participating in research with a history of excluding Black people is also history in the making. It's saying no more to the white-size-fits-all approach. We communicate that participation in research is part of what will make real change in brain health disparities possible. And in talking about research participation in this way, participants can see themselves as active agents within the larger story of research in this country. But the onus, of course, is first on us as researchers, as research institutions, to create and support the right conditions for underrepresented groups to be attracted to and to stay engaged in research. So it's not enough to simply say, join a brain health study. We need more Black people so treatments can be generalized to more people. Even when you've earned their trust or you're a trusted researcher in the community, it's still not enough. The generalizability argument, while it's true, it isn't necessarily persuasive. Minoritized communities know it's not their absence that created the problem. They know it's the system that is the problem because the system is life in America, right? It's inequity and negligence and indifference. It's like a fractal repeating again and again in interpersonal and institutional interactions. And research is just one of those systems. Because asking minoritized people to join into research to improve generalizability is too often asking them to join research systems not built to retain them. We say, join. Your participation is so important. And then they can't get in because eligibility requirements, right, that exclude people with conditions prevalent in their community. Or once in the study, there's no interaction with anybody that looks like them, no culturally resonant support to stay engaged, the logistics don't work, there's no report back reinforcing that messaging, that participation is crucial and it's advancing the science or that it will benefit community. These shortcomings are holes in the system, and minoritized people fall out of research through these many exit points. So our ORCOR just held communities, this was like a week and a half ago. We just held a community discussion with older Black adults around brain health, and we did our introduction about generalizability, how important it is to have more representation in the brain bank, and the very first question from a community member, which we had already anticipated and we already knew that we did not have a good answer for. This is what she asked. When you're considering donation, how do you know that your brain is actually going towards research that helps African Americans? So no, generalizability sometimes isn't enough. Many community members that we work with want to be in targeted research that intentionally centers Black American health. Okay, finally, this slide. The figure in the middle is the participant and relationship-centered engagement model, which is from the paper I mentioned earlier on research justice and participation. So it describes the necessary conditions for engaging historically excluded people. So I'll just briefly go through it. First is having an ongoing, sustained, bidirectional relationship. We've heard that term a couple times today, with community that goes beyond research. Next is inclusive design, and that's attention to all those holes I just described. Then accessibility, making sure that participation is achievable for people of varying life circumstances. Next, recognizing that not all studies are a good fit, that participation should work for the participant, not just for the researcher to increase their minority numbers. And I say that because in places like Oregon, where I'm from, let me tell you, Black people are 2%. In Portland, we're between 6 and 7%. And when you get a Black community member that wants to participate in a study, it is very tempting, and there's a lot of pressure to get them in that study. But if it's not a good fit, and they have a bad experience in that study, that has ramifications for other community members that maybe would have considered research. And next in the model is openness, actions in the community that leave people open to research. It's so important we know that study enrollment is not the only outcome that counts. And finally, readiness. This is a state of being for readiness for research, state of being that depends on all of these factors and beyond to arrive at a sense of perceived personal relevance. So only once these conditions are in place will groups that have been historically excluded from research be attracted to, then maybe consider and maybe join research numbers in ways that can change the tide of representation. So I'm going to talk for a minute about the appreciation event, which I don't think we actually talk about as an intentional event, a prime occasion to frame the story of research and actually to recruit. So we have a big annual event that invites all Black participants in our center's research, which actually primarily comes from 2 studies which center the Black experience, and that's the SHARP study. I hope I'll have a few minutes at the end to just briefly discuss the SHARP study. So in particular, it's the SHARP study that engages many emerging Black scholars as interns, and they're involved in every stage of the research so that when participants walk into the room, at the appreciation event, it's a room full of people they already know. They come into a space of familiarity. And we set the tone with our tagline, honoring our health and history. Historic community images decorate the tables and remind people they are part of the story of this community and that participation in research is also part of that story. Even if it's just unfolding with them, it is part of that story. We have a celebratory photo booth run by a local Black gentleman and his granddaughter. We have signs that reinforce the message that Black memory matters, that we are the change, that research doesn't happen without us, or research for us doesn't happen without us, and that research is a community thing. These are all threads of the same story that as a Black person, participating in research and demanding research that is designed with our inclusion in mind, this is an act of social justice and right-making in a history of wrongdoing and negligence of Black presence and perspective in research. So the appreciation event is also an opportunity to plant seeds of openness. So people bring a +1 who witnesses this community of research participants, who witnesses these empowering messages, and they see people just like them that they often know from other community contexts. They hear us talk about and they see how the individual participation of their friend or their family member is contributing to collective change, to advancing science. That seed is planted and it may take root. It might begin to help them think of research as possibly being relevant for them too. So it's so important that we know that what is appreciated appreciates. And when we appreciate participation and retention increases. It might seem like an obvious message, but I don't think we've talked about the intentionality that must go behind the messaging and, in fact, the whole ordeal is like a negative word, the whole planning of the appreciation event. So we connect participants to the larger story of research by sharing the findings that we couldn't have had without them. We showcase all the conferences and invited lectures we've been to show that there's a national and international interest in what they are doing right there in Little Portland, that there are people around the world that are actually interested in what they're doing. Our certificates of appreciation picture Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller, who of course is the first Black psychiatrist and Alzheimer's research pioneer. And we have President Obama's message on there that change will not come if we wait for another person or some other time. And our outreach specialist, who is leading this event because that's the person the community is most familiar with, right? It's not me, it's not our center director. He has this wonderful way of connecting our participants with the ongoing history of research, unfolding with their participation. He reminds them that we've been part of Alzheimer's research since the start, and we're going to be part of it when they find a cure. So the Sharing History Through Active Reminiscence and Photoimagery Study, or SHARP, weaves the community story into the story of research. So SHARP uses oral history to engage older Black adults in research. And what it is in triads, in groups of 3 over 4 to 6 months, impaired and non-impaired participants, they walk routes in gentrifying Black neighborhoods. And they're using the SHARP walking application, which is preloaded with all these routes. And there's historical images that prompt conversational reminiscence as they walk about local Black life and culture during their lifetime. And the walking conversations are recorded for a digital oral history archive that we then give back to the community so they can use as they see fit. So we are in our 4th session in Portland now, and it's been adopted in Seattle. And tomorrow, actually, I'm submitting a grant for it to expand to Oakland. Yeah, that's tomorrow. Retention in SHARP has been high. It's been set between 76 and 90%. SHARP attracts and engages community members because it's all about community. Brain health really just runs in the background, and that's in the walking and the social engagement. It's really the act of being with others who know exactly how they feel about neighborhood changes because they've lived it too. It's the memory sharing, the stories that bring people to and keep them in SHARP. In fact, 92% were extremely likely to recommend to friends and family, and the remaining were either like likely, mostly likely, so pretty much a strong recommendation from participants and repeat participants that come back each time. So even though brain health is not centered, the message that behaviors do matter gets through. As this participant says, it has made me admit that I do have a memory problem, and it's not going to go away, and working on the health things that I need to do. A good research experience translates into a good story worth telling and retelling. It's a conversation starter, it's a seed planter for others in the community, and we all know that the best recruiters are other research participants. So when research is truly about community and it's enjoyable, people want to share it. As one participant says, we do talk about it a lot with other people, with our kids and other relatives and friends, and we give them a little bit, and they want to know a lot more about if it's possible, when is it going to be open? And finally, I had to skip those. Finally, we've taken the behavioral mechanisms of SHARP, which is the physical, social, and reminiscence activity, and we've integrated that into community events. So we have these talk and taste events that we partner with Preserve Coalition for Black American Memory and Brain Health, a community group. And in between the health presentations, we have dance sessions. I want to start Soul Brain. I thought that was great. We have dance sessions. They can stand up in their chair. We were calling them Motown Groove sessions, but we might switch to Soul Brain. And we have Remember Together sessions with historical neighborhood images. So it's really a wonderful and celebratory way for people to connect to brain health and to one another, but it's also trying on the research. Because if they enjoyed the physical and the social and the reminiscence activity that they were doing in these community events, then maybe they would enjoy them as regular participants in SHARP. So in conclusion, I just hope that this talk has generated some ideas about how to frame and engage participants in the story of research. And I know we're not having a panel, but I will be around for any questions. Thanks.